Good to see you.
Good morning, Cheryl. Nice to see you too. So you have a pretty sky this morning, eh?
Oh, beautiful sky, pastel sky this morning.
That's wonderful. It's not as hot as it has been in Portland, so I'm very grateful for that.
And and you're with this bright and early.
Yes, yes, it's pretty.
It, it's a pretty beautiful morning actually.
Oh, it's great. Well, it's 7 a.m. and this is a group that has agreed as one of its norms that it will get started right on time. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our fourth meeting. Appreciate you being here, and we're going to just go ahead to the next slide. We are going to start with a very brief roll call for the review to be able to share who's here for those who might be listening later on. Recap our last session very briefly, and then Cheryl Allen is joining us to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities for this effort. We're going to take a look at the Google site to make sure you're all oriented to what's there. We're going to look at some of the topics that you brought up as priorities for discussion, and also how that might link to the subchapters in Chapter 58. And then we'll be focusing on a couple topics today, and we'll finish with our next steps. So if you can just, I'm going to have you go around and say your name and your affiliation, and we will move from there. So Cheryl, you're here with us.
Yes, good morning everyone. Cheryl Allen, working as the Deputy Superintendent at the Office of Public Instruction, and appreciate each and every one of you being here this morning.
Okay, and thank you for joining us, Cheryl. Curtis?
Curtis Smeby, MSU Northern.
Okay, Lisa?
I'm Lisa Schmidt. I'm a community member from Conrad.
Thank you. Tristan?
Good morning, I'm Tristan. I am Cheryl Allen's executive assistant over the OPI.
Great. Allison?
Morning, Allison Harmon, MSU in Bozeman.
Carrie?
It's Kari. I'm health enhancement at MSU in Bozeman.
Okay, I'll get that right. That's the second time I've been corrected. Nishala?
Nishala Silva, MSU Billings.
Okay, thank you. Kieran?
Kieran O'Mara, Beartooth Elementary School in Billings.
Okay. Emily?
My name is Emily Dean. I'm the Director of Advocacy with the Montana School Boards Association.
Okay, thank you. McCall?
Good morning. I'm McCall Flynn, the Executive Director at the Board of Public Ed.
All righty. Laura?
Good morning. I'm Laura Poser Brown. I'm a 5 through 8 librarian in Lewistown.
Thank you. Barbara?
Hi, I'm Barbara Frank. I'm an elementary principal in Missoula, Montana. Obviously, Montana. That was weird.
No, not altogether weird. Zach?
Zach Hawkins, Director of Indian Ed for All at the Office of Public Instruction.
All right, thank you. Have I missed anybody, or has anybody joined since I started? Okay, thank you. So much.
1 second, Jacqueline. I've got some people in the attendees that I'm moving over.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, good morning and thank you for being here. We're just very briefly saying our name and our affiliation before we get started. So I see a few people who have just joined. Jonathan, can you just go ahead and say your name and affiliation for the recording?
Wait, who is this?
Jonathan.
Good morning. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan J. Eagleman. I am the Ojibwe Nahio instructor for District 13 in Box Elder, Montana.
Thank you so much. What a great voice you have. Gosh, that's just a beautiful voice. Anyway, Gail. Gail? Okay. Susan, did you say your name already? Your affiliate?
Yes, I am a professor in special education at Montana State University Billings. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and Mary.
Yes, I am an occupational therapist and assistive technology professional.
Very good. Okay, I think I have everybody. Speak up now or we shall move on. Okay. We're going to have Cheryl do a little speaking to us about our roles and expectations as kind of a follow-up from our conversation last time, where we focused on the potential for residencies for in-service educators. We talked a good deal about, especially at the end of our conversation, the importance of real-world experience in the field in diverse settings. And that was kind of our first topic of discussion. But we also said we were going to talk a little bit more about our process. So Cheryl, please go ahead and speak to us.
And I'll, as we visit for a few minutes. So when we look at the tremendous work responsibilities in educator preparation and in our educators that are in the field, what we know is there's constant transitions that occur. I really appreciate the mantra of a colleague of mine out of Wisconsin. She says, I'm not asking you to change, I'm asking you to learn. And it's what we ask our students all the time, because one of the benefits of learning is that by nature, there's change processes occurring. So when we think in terms of the comprehensive work that we do, there's two things that are at play. One is in transitions, there's got to be a way to maintain stability for transitions to occur. And the second is, as we look at the tremendous challenges facing education today, we've got to ensure that we're transitioning to the processes that fit the third decade of the 21st century and beyond. And as we look at those two elements, I want to give you a little bit of background. Chapter 58, again, is the accreditation standards for the educator preparation programs as tasked by the Board of Public Ed for the OPI to facilitate those. We also partner with the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation, AKA CAPE. CAPE became fully operational in 2013 as the sole accrediting body for educator prep providers. Montana has had an MOU with CAPE since that time, and the MOU with CAPE is going to, I believe, be in front of the Board of Public Education next week for their consideration of approving that MOU. The superintendent already has. So again, that's the idea of transitions and stabilities. What I'd like to ask all of you to do on the other piece is I put in the chat a hyperlink for you, and that's going to take us over to Arizona State University's College of Education there. And I believe this very brief slide on one of their pages really may capture part 2 of the challenges.
Karen?
I'm sorry, I'm just not seeing the link. Did you say it was in the chat?
Yeah, I dropped that in the chat earlier.
You may need to
May
put
need
it in
to do it again.
Yes, thank
Yep.
you.
You bet. Let me.
I see it now. Thank you.
See it now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm hopeful that as you've had a chance to scan this page, that you're finding things that resonate with the discussions that have been taking place. All things to all people at all times. I've listened to folks say that's a near impossible task that, first of all, we're asking to prepare our students for, teachers for, much less for our educators to fulfill. And so the last sentence, if we're not getting the educator workforce or the outcomes we want, or I would say we need to redesign the profession, the workplace, and how we prepare people for both. That has been the discussion around the big levers, if you would. And again, knowing that's not going to occur in a few short months, but it absolutely should be on the radar of all of us as we look forward. I appreciated the approach that ASU took in a pilot with the model, and if you're interested, there's more information around that on this site. But I appreciated that what they did was recognized we needed the partnership of the school districts. We needed to see if the pilot could work. They've got some white papers out there around their year-long paid internship process that they put in play and what they determined from that. So I wanted to bring that this piece to your attention because we know that Montana, like most other states, faces what we call the teacher shortage, the recruitment retention challenges. And I also appreciated that what Arizona State shared is it's a workforce design problem for all of us. So just shifting that slightly. So as we look at what the work is, I believe identification of the big levers that need ongoing attention and support and building out those models by which we can ensure that we are addressing workforce design on multiple levels occurs. And at the same time that we're looking at the revisions that need to take place so we have the stability that's necessary in systems to allow the big levers to go to play, making those transitions or learning for those changes that are needed. So with that, I'll stand for any questions folks may have.
Your hand is up. Thank you. Lisa, your hand is up. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheryl, how do you see balancing stability with transitions? What, in your professional opinion, what needs to remain stable so that we can harness the big levers?
So currently our educator prep programs are tied off into a couple different ways to stay accredited. One is through the Office of Public Instruction. The others are through regional or national groups that they may use from their university systems. So in order for our educator prep programs to be able to move forward with the work they need to do, we've got to be able to keep a process of accreditation. With that, I believe we've got to be really strong and clear on the outcomes that are necessary versus just the inputs and the outputs. And that as we look at our accreditation standards, are they clearly identifying outcomes? And if they're not, we should be identifying what we believe are outcomes that measure the standard. So there's that side of it that I think is important for stability. The other side of it is the identification of the big levers that we know are necessary from all of our decades of work in this profession that are necessary to ensure that the students of the 21st century and the teachers that are asked to continue to climb tremendous mountains in the 21st century deserve a system of effectiveness, and our students need that system. I'll tie us back to the Montana Constitution, which clearly indicates the purpose of education is that we fulfill the full education potential of each person. And of course, we tie in those other elements around equality and equity, and to ensure that our teachers and our students and all of us are learning the very important contributions of our tribal nations, and that we recognize that Indian education for all is a key component of that framework as well. So it's putting all of those into play to develop what will address the challenges rather than continue with the challenges and hope that somehow we miraculously can shift those within the structures that we have.
Thank you, Cheryl. I see Emily Dean has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so looking through some of these materials. One thing that it is reminding me of on every link I click on is HB 246, and I'm honestly seeing a lot of similarities and consistency here in what the education community has tried to do with HB 246. So I'm wondering, do you see gaps there?
Yeah.
Or I mean, it looks very, very similar to the flexibilities that we were able to pass this last year.
Yeah, so when we look at House Bill 246, for those of you that may not be familiar with that, I believe what's being referenced is Bertoglio's bill that had tremendous elements of taking flexibilities that already existed and putting those into statute out of arm. And as well as we had bills addressing reciprocity, a lot that Chapter 57 is working on. I think today they're talking about reciprocity needs. So when we look at 246, it works to solidify flexibilities that we have currently, but it really doesn't address design. And so I think that's the piece, Emily, that we've got to work with all of the elements and entities, from community to educators to parents to our higher ed, that all of these pieces somehow we need to be able to pull those together. So that's where that's Cheryl's take on 246. Like you, I probably have only read it 70 or 80 times.
Are there other questions for Cheryl about our role and the expectations for us in this work?
I have a question. So when I look at Chapter 58, Cheryl, I'm curious about how the kind of big picture things we're talking about fit. And so if you could point me, because if we're revising Chapter 58, I'm confused about where these changes are going to go. And so that I just want to make sure I have a good understanding of what it is that we're revising. But also another question is, are we doing more than revising here?
So we're looking at the revision. Good question, Allison. And it comes back to the transition of stability, which is again, Chapter 58. And looking at each of the standards in the context of do we have the measurable outcomes, because those standards along with CAPE are what drive the accreditation process that the OPI has been involved with and supported right along with higher ed. The other piece of this is is the challenge, the question as we look at the bigger Educator prep program, as we look at the bigger challenges in the K-12 arena. Do we have those alignments that are going to create that design that's necessary? I know that we've got a lot of different efforts out there. We provided the recommendation that came from Angela McLean to the superintendent in February. That was looked at in research. Zach has that. I think this group requested to review that. That's at play. We've got grow your own task forces going on, which is an element of that workforce design. We've got Rise Higher going on, which is another grassroots effort to address workforce design or those gaps as we talk about the teacher shortages. So we're addressing, striving to address teacher shortages, and none of these are new robust ideas. It's that regeneration or striving again, but the design is still the design. The challenges are still the challenges. So we can look at hopefully some ideas of stopgap supports, but will they change the design is really the bigger question. And it seems while this group of excellent thinkers is together, they can also make some big lever recommendations to move forward. Not asking this group to dig those down, but definitely as you're going through the work to make the big lever recommendations. As we look at this, what we do know is the whole construct of personalization touches every facet. And I think we heard Lisa on the very first call talk about she wants that individualized personalization for our students into the classrooms. And we know that effectiveness today requires that ability to personalize. We're personalized every time that we click into any website today. It's already giving you from data what personalization looks. So it's looking at those elements that are or are not in standards that perhaps need to be. It's looking at what are the outcomes, can we clearly identify those? And finally, what are your recommendations on the big levers to the superintendent that need to be priorities at the OPI?
Thank you, Cheryl. So it sounds like one of our questions from last time about whether this group can indeed generate big picture recommendations that don't necessarily fit into ARM language, whether that will be relevant and helpful. It sounds like it will be, so that's very good. And we've got some great note-taking going on to keep track of those. Emily, I saw your hand up for a moment. Is it still up?
I'm going to pause. I have some thoughts, but I'm going to hold on to them for later.
Very good. Other questions or observations? Okay, I'll turn it over to Zach.
All right. Well, thank you, Cheryl, for taking the time this morning to visit with the group and help clarify some things. So I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint for a second. And then I'll share what I wanted to do is just kind of go through the Google page where we have things sort of, we have a repository. And what I'm going to do is, for those that may not be familiar, if you go up here, you can see that for each week of the meeting, there's a link that you can click on, and it has the agenda, the recording of these meetings is there for previous meetings, and then also the PowerPoint display and other materials. So if you go to today's meeting, this is what you'll see. So the meeting link is there. Some of this is a little slow coming up, but it should come up. But one thing I wanted to point folks to is, and I believe Jacqueline has stepped away for just a minute, but as we kind of discuss these lever topics in more detail today, she has created, sorry, I don't know why this is taking so long. There it goes. She has created this document here, which is a crosswalk that kind of looks at what are kind of the big picture things that we're talking about. So you see, we've talked about pedagogy and content and balancing that sort of, subject area content with pedagogical skills and knowledge. So as we look at possibly changing verbiage, these are some of the subchapters and sections that would have some real applicability to that conversation. So I just wanted to highlight that. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit, but this is going to be here for folks to take a look at. And also, I just wanted to say, I am going to work with Tristan and maybe some of these, Cheryl has shared this morning the recommendations that came out of OCHI for chapter 57. I don't believe Kirk is on today, but that was a request that he made last meeting. She's also shared some of the crosswalk that she being Cheryl between CAPE and chapter 58 in Montana. And so what I'd like to do is maybe work with Tristan between now and next week to get sort of a folder right on the landing page that has some of those documents so folks can go in and review those and not necessarily have to go to these session dates. But right now, the way it's laid out, if you're interested, you can go to those session dates and look at any materials that were shared there, because they'll be kind of aligned with that particular meeting. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is this document here. This is a list, and this was another request that was made last week. And actually, I'm going to just pop it out for a second. So this is a list of the task force members and sort of your title. But when it comes up, one of the things that was asked was if we could have kind of, and some folks, it's fairly apparent where you're from. So for example, Gary, it says Bozeman School District Trustee. We're going to assume you're from Bozeman. But some folks here, like Kieran, we don't necessarily know where in the state you're located. So if folks could go in and put their community or residence, and then also, just a quick, doesn't have to be anything extensive, just a little professional bio, your professional attributes, sort of what you bring to this group. And so right now, this will be, if you go to the Google site, it will be on the July 8th meeting folder. But I'm going to maybe work with Tristan and kind of reformatting some of this a little bit. So when you get to the landing page, some of those documents and some of the background stuff, research and things like that will be a little more, easily accessible. So that as we're doing this work, if you want to refer to something, you can do that. And then I also needed to just share really quick, if folks are wondering about why certain things might not be on our OPI webpage, we are undergoing a transition to a new website platform, and so right now everything's kind of frozen, and we don't want to make changes until we've established things into the new platform. And so once that's done, we will have more detailed things about Chapter 58 on our website. And again, as part of that transparency, public transparency for this process, because ultimately we're doing this work, at the behest of the citizens of Montana. So I just wanted to share some of that. I know we've talked about the repository, but we haven't really, kind of showed everybody where everything is in there. And like I said, there's some documents that Cheryl shared just this morning that I'll work with Tristan to get those up very soon. So are there any questions about that? Okay.
Laura has
Oh,
her hand
Laura
up.
has her hand raised. Go ahead, Laura.
Hi, Zach. I just popped into that in the website and tried to open up the sheet, and I was able to open it, but we have view only rights. And so we won't be able to at this point put our
Okay.
biography info in.
Okay, so I will work with Tristan on that, and then I'll send an email out at some point later today when that issue is resolved. Thank you for checking on that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Anything else? All right. If there are no other questions, and Jacqueline, I don't know if you were on, I did just kind of tease a little bit your crosswalk document. So I don't know if you want to, do you want to share that actually?
Yes, that would be
Okay.
great.
All right, so I'll stop sharing.
Okay. And this is in response to the very important discussion we had last time about our process. So what Zach and I discussed is the importance of, and Allison alluded to this as well, the importance for us of being able to root our conversations, or at least link them to the specific language in the arms that we are going to be that we are charged with reviewing and adjusting and revising. So this is just an attempt to lay out some of the possible ways that there's overlap, and perhaps be a bit of a guide for us, at least initially, to look at, well, where in the chapters, in the subchapters in particular, might we look to see language that's relevant to the big picture topics, the lever topics we're calling them, that you all identified in the very first meeting. So this document first just lists each subchapter and what the topic is. And in a moment, I'm going to also open up the chapter language to orient folks to this document in case you haven't seen it before. I apologize, some of you have. So each of the 9 subchapters are simply listed here at the top. And I've noted that a couple of them have been repealed in their entirety, subchapters 2, 4, and 9. That doesn't mean we don't want to look at them and examine them, but I just wanted to let you know that some of this has been reorganized over time, and the language in these has been repealed. The actual requirements have been repealed, and in some cases moved to different subchapters. So there are really only 6 subchapters that have content currently that's enacted, so to speak. And then all we did was list each of those big lever topics that were identified in the first meeting, and list some potential areas. And in a moment, we're going to look at where these are, some potential areas, or subchapters rather, that seem related to, for example, the first topic, the balance between pedagogical knowledge and content, moving from content to facilitating learning. This is a big topic. How to differentiate the learning experience and ensure equality of educational opportunities. This is something we talked about last time. It definitely came up in our discussion about candidates having more real world experience in diverse settings. And so each of these subchapters and specific areas of the subchapters seem relevant. Subchapter 3, 5 in 2 different spots, 6, 7, and what have you. And in a moment, we'll look at how the ARM language is organized, so this will make more sense. But this is just meant to be, it's not necessarily the map of what we have to do by any means. It's just meant to be an initial take at where some of the language can be found. And I think it will be important for us to look at this language possibly before and after we have a high level discussion about a topic that's important to the task force. So we have pedagogy and content. The second topic is one we talked about last time. Initially, we focused on a year-long residency. And then we sort of moved toward the end of the discussion. This is my interpretation anyway, and Zach's, to the value and importance of perhaps more hands-on real-world experience for candidates in diverse settings. And there are a number of spots in the ARMS, a number of subchapters and specific topics within those subchapters where there could be language inserted to signal that, possibly not. It's really going to be up to this group. Another topic was more robust observations and mentoring, continuous improvement and the desire for lifelong learning, as well as accountability to outcomes, the importance of relationships, specifically the ability to develop those with students, parents, and the community. And I think our final topic, appropriate technical skills and knowledge, Zach and I took the liberty of sort of combining that with topic 1. So as we move through these 5 topics, we want to be aware of the subchapters and look at them and make sure that you all are aware of what does the language look like and what is it possible that we might change. I'm going to pause here to see if there's a question. And again, my next step is to look at the ARM document, the language of the ARMS, and just review it so you're all a little more comfortable navigating it if you haven't before. Nishala, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So I had this same question in a previous meeting about chapter 58 revisions. I thought it's appropriate to ask that same question since we are talking about the chapter 58. My question is particularly about the alignment of PEP standards to CAPE national standards. Currently, we do have crosswalks with PEP standards and CAPE national standards, specifically 300s and 600s. So since CAPE also went through a revision of the initial standards, I mean, in this task force, are we planning on looking into the CAPE national standards and any kind of alignment between the CAPE and the PEP standards is my question. The reason why I asked that question in a previous meeting is institutions who are doing a joint review with CAPE and PEPs, since PEP's standards are aligned with CAPE standards, when we do syllabi crosswalks and alignment charts, we don't have to repeat the same thing for PEPs and CAPE standards because those are aligned. So I just wanted to know if this task force is going to focus on looking into CAPE standards when we do the chapter 58 revisions.
So Nishala, one thing I can share is we do, I think I referenced when I was going through the Google site that Cheryl did send a document that kind of shows that crosswalk, you know, for this task force to kind of look at and think about as they're doing this work. You know, more specifically, you know, how much alignment, how much desire there is to follow CAPE, I think is, you know, somewhat up to the discretion of this group.
Okay. Let me pull up this document, which I think it would may be helpful to have in the repository at some point. This is just a downloading of the ARM's current chapter 58. And it looks a bit overwhelming when you see it has 84 pages. So I just wanted to walk through a couple things about it to help us when we review this document. And it may be useful even to pause for a moment today and just take a look at it individually for a moment. But the first 6 pages are simply sort of a table of contents listing the subchapter and the specific rules under that subchapter. So you see subchapter 1, the first and the last, first and the fifth actually, rules have been repealed, and the other 3 that are still standing are listed. This is just a listing of the topic of the subchapter and the specific rules. And as I mentioned, some have been repealed in their entirety, such as subchapter 2, Organization and Administration of Teacher Education. All of these rules have been repealed. Subchapter 3, all of them have been repealed. I may have missed that. I may have forgotten to mention subchapter 3. Subchapter, oh, no, I'm
And
sorry. Here we
is-
go.
Is Curtis, could you outline how the repeal process, how did that occur, and timing of that repeal?
There is a historical, there's parentheses. We'll see in a moment. There's parentheses with some history and some information, including links, every time you see repealed. So you can go back and look at that and look at some of the information and the prior language that was repealed. But I don't myself know, and maybe Zach can help me here, a lot about the process. But it's different at different times for the various rules.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm not sure if that's comes through the task force recommendation process or not, as far as how things are repealed.
Subchapter 4, general standards, all have been repealed. However, I noticed that in subchapter 5, there are some general standards in the first rule, and that's an area where I saw a lot of potential for overlap between topics this group wants to talk about and potential revision. Subchapter 5 also includes specific standards, and this is, again, I'm just looking at the table of contents. It's the first 6 pages. It includes specific standards for quite a few disciplines. So after the sort of general standards in 501, you go 502, 3, 4. These are many different, and this takes up the bulk of your 84 pages. Each of these disciplines has specific standards for what candidates should be able to do and what they should know and be able to do. Subchapter 6 has been somewhat repealed, information about advanced programs. Chapter 7 is about, I see there's a question. Let me just finish this. Subchapter 7, supervisory and administrative programs. There is school counseling in here in the bottom, kind of tucked in. Subchapter 6 in the advanced programs, which was important and especially relevant for chapter 57. Subchapter 7, supervisors. Subchapter 8, innovative and experimental programs. One rule repealed, one not. And then subchapter 9. Once you get into, and then I'll take questions. Once you get past this sort of table of contents, you see the actual language for each rule within the subchapter, including whether it's repealed. And then history here is what I was referring to before. It gives some information and you can click some of these links. Honestly, I don't know a lot about this process either, but you will see the subchapter 5 takes up the bulk of the document. So when we look at the crosswalk, you'll see certain subchapters and rules repeatedly mentioned because they are the ones that are the most relevant. And then subchapter 5, all the specific standards for the different disciplines. There may be some language in there that should be reviewed. So I put as needed. Whomever takes the lead in looking at some of that language may want to say, does any of the specific standards in the various disciplines need to be tweaked, excuse me, as a result of our discussion. But we've sort of tried to highlight the more comprehensive subchapters that contain language relevant to the topics you identified. I'd like to give you a time to look at it, but there's a couple questions first, I think, or just chat, maybe just chat comments. This would be a good time is there a way to put this document in the chat? I noticed I can't put a document in the chat. Or maybe we could put the link to the ARMS in the chat. If people want to take a brief moment to look at this document, I'm sure some of you have, but if you haven't, and even if you have, it may be good to just take a brief look at some of the ones that are referenced in the crosswalk. And also, this is a good time for questions or thoughts about our process. It's our goal to try to introduce to you, here's one of the subchapters and some of the rules that may be relevant to the conversation we're about to have or that we had, last time. We need to think about whether we would make any changes to the language as a result of these conversations.
And I see Tristan beat me to it, but yeah, that's the link to chapter 58 on the Secretary of State's website. So that's another way to access these. And again, you can see when they were repealed. But Curtis, I will do a little more digging and try to give you a more concrete answer as far as how that process occurs.
Are there any just questions about accessing the ARMS themselves, the language? The link is in the chat for one website where you can find it. We'll also have in the repository this document that downloads all of it, all 84 pages, so that you can look at it sort of all together in one place. So last time we talked a little bit about how are we going to reconcile, and Allison brought this up as well, how are we going to reconcile the task in front of us, our charge, which is to revise language in subchapters and rules such as these, while we also have big picture topics that we want to discuss and potentially make suggestions to the superintendent about. And that's, Zach and I felt it was important to begin to shift to showing you the language in the subchapters, in the ARMS, and having the big picture discussions and kind of toggling back and forth. So we're kind of keeping our conversations grounded in what we can and can't adjust in the language, as well as keeping track of big picture recommendations that you're making. Thoughts about how that process might work most efficiently, or any preferences for when we look at this language? One thought we have is to sort of assign a little bit of homework to look at certain subchapters in advance of a conversation. Another might be to look at it during our meetings and potentially assign a subcommittee to look more closely and make some recommendations about changes in the language based on our conversation. Laura?
I have kind of a question about subchapter 9, which was repealed. Subchapter 9 says it's the standards for approving competency-based or performance-based programs, and that's been repealed. So I know we're talking about how you guys aren't really sure on how the repeal process works. What exactly was that standard, and why did we get away from performance-based programs? I feel like a lot of the discussion we've had over the past several weeks has really had an emphasis in performance-based, but I'm wondering if this means more like, you know, oh, what was the Soldiers to Teachers program, and those, is it that kind of program? I'm just really unclear on what this standard was and why it's gone and how it's different from some of the things we've proposed.
Zach?
Yeah, I'm not sure, and I'll have to see if we can find more of that language to really, you know, delve into what did that say, to give people more of a sense of, you know, what that was getting at. Because I do agree with your point, Laura, that you know, we have had conversations about, you know, competency based, and obviously Cheryl just was referencing, you know, thinking about outcomes, and asking ourselves, are the outcomes that we want clearly identified? So I think it's a good point. I did want to say one thing. I did ask last week after our meeting, there is nothing that says that this group can't recommend to reinstate something that was repealed and or, you know, tweak language a little bit. So I do want to just keep that on people's mind, that because it's repealed doesn't mean that it's off limits in terms of looking at it and possibly reinstating it and making some changes. But with regard to your question about, you know, how do we see that, I'll have to, I'll add that to my list of things I need to do between now and next week.
Thank you.
Okay, so certainly if you haven't looked at the ARMS, this is a good time in our process to take a little bit of time to look at them, read them, and have a sense of how they're organized so that you'll be able to follow along, and we can work together in terms of thinking about how to best address changes that we would like to suggest or adjustments. I'm going to stop sharing now, Zach, and we can go back to the slides. Okay, if you could just go back, if you don't, just to one, just back. I want to make sure we mentioned everything we needed to about the, yeah, okay. Again, the crosswalk is just meant to be a starting point. It can be a place where we direct our attention initially. Here are some rules that appear relevant to this topic. Isn't necessarily saying that we have to make changes there or that those are the only subchapters or rules that should be changed. And as Zach just said, anything that's been repealed can be reviewed. I think there are live links on the Montana rules link that Tristan sent out in the chat. I'm pretty sure that you can click those and get the language. I'm not certain. So at some point, someone should take a look. But if not, we can find out more about that as well. I'm sure that it exists. And we do have the authority to review it and see where it's relevant.
Yeah, I just tried it on the website, and you can go back and actually see the language that was repealed. So if you go to the website, you can look at those things.
Excellent.
Everybody, hi, hello, it's Jay. I got a couple of questions.
Please.
All right.
You know, Zach and everybody, I think everybody has an opportunity here. And now that I've actually begun to understand what it is that we're doing. I want to take you guys back to the Rocky Boy community, going back, we'll say a year ago today or yesterday. I introduced through our local, we'll say, history, language, culture teachers. We're class 7s, right? Okay, so we introduced a concept, and the concept was this. It was to take the existing language wherever it existed, and now I know where it's at, to take the existing language to not force change, but to standardize our language curriculum. That was one aspect. The featured item of the whole change was to produce Ojibwe and Ne'io speakers. So I thought to produce an MOU between the two schools, the two districts, Rocky Boy and Box Elder, to begin that process. So 360 days later, we have yet to get to the first base on that process. So if you're looking at the chapters as they're chapter 58 as it's descriptive, there's pedagogical issues there, or there's curriculum issues in addition to that, and there's world languages. So as it were, then everything that exists within chapter 58 as it's relative to producing new teachers, the past year we have hosted, I think I counted 5 new teachers. And not to dog anybody, but their pedagogical prowess, along with their speaking ability, as it's specific to Ojibwe or Ne'iyawe, and their history of their own reservation system, then was not developed to a degree where they're going to come into the classroom and recognize that. I'll use this name, Johnny in kindergarten or Tommy in the 3rd grade. They kind of have some issues with their identity all the way around. So in other words, the parents, they don't want the language to be an emphasis. Yet in the community where they come from, there is an emergency declaration saying, hold up, folks, we're losing our language. And it just so happens yesterday, the community buried our last Ojibwe speaker. So in the Ne'iyao side of things, I think we're down to like 38 or 39 bona fide Ne'iyao speakers. So if you're looking at this coming from, we'll say, the reservation perspective, within each of these realms, then there is opportunities for change. So the development required then to take a real close look at these 2 schools as examples then and say, why should we change? What is the purpose behind that change? And what are those outcomes as they reflect the educational vision of these 2 tribal schools? I don't know where I'm going with this exactly, but what I'm trying to do is make sense of how it is that via the task force, we can take what is currently described as other world languages and make them specific now to Ojibwe and Ne'iyao world language components, we'll say. We can take the curriculum and we can take the pedagogy and we can start to reorient our future educators as well as our students as to the validity of how it is that we see the world and what's important to us and what should be focused upon via the curriculum. And we can do that through this change process. I wanted to throw that out there in that, it's kind of been a challenge. So anymore, you know, my position has become, well, if we have 2 tribally controlled school boards and 2 tribal superintendents, and we're not willing really to sit down in one room and say, maybe it's time for this type of change. So I don't know if that adds or lends anything to this discussion, but within the existing framework, there is the opportunity now for our community to say, wait, now hold up, let's change this. They advertised for the class 7 through 12 instructor at Rocky Boy School, and nobody applied for the job. So going back to the article that said that you know, there's less and less people interested in this educational process, I think that's a harbinger of the change that's going to come, you know, whether we like it or not, within the public school system. So I want to put a comma there, and I want to not necessarily get that off my chest, but I wanted to add some perspective as it concerns the rural tribal public school system. You know, in addition to the public dollars that we get other public tribal dollars that intend then to facilitate all of these processes as it concerns pedagogy, curriculum, language, and doing our own research for our own history. You know, so within that realm of the sovereign, I believe that our task force then should consider each of these tribal communities while we're doing this work. Okay, that's 8 minutes more than I wanted to talk, but I wanted to throw that out there.
Well, Jay, I appreciate you being here and sharing that perspective. And I can just tell you, as someone who graduated from an EPP in the state and started out as a young educator on the Fort Belknap Reservation, that I felt very ill prepared for the cultural environment and the challenges that I faced there. So I do think there's a good opportunity when we're thinking about, when we start talking about some of these lever topics around sort of individualized instruction, this notion of meeting students where they are, and the understanding that we do have 7 reservations and 12 sovereign tribes in our state, and that is our biggest minority group. When we talk about you know, equality of educational opportunity as it's outlined in our Constitution, when we talk about Indian Ed for All, I think there are things that we can look at where we could address, you know, some of those things, i.e., you know, Jay, you talk about language. I can tell you, as someone who also taught in Blackfeet country, that when I, as a teacher, even had a basic understanding of some Blackfeet words and could use those words, you know, in greeting and just basic things with my students in my classroom, what a difference that made in that relationship and the way that they viewed me as an instructor. So I appreciate you bringing that perspective, and I think as we think about these things, it's very important that we're keeping in mind that a lot of our educators will be stepping into on-or-near reservation communities, and to ensure equality of opportunity, they have to be prepared for those situations.
I also heard Jay saying that in any place where we mention specific languages, world languages, we can be explicit about the languages that he referenced and name them so that they are part of the rural language.
One thing I do want to point out about that is that as it stands currently, class 7 licensure does not go through our traditional EPP programs. That's a tribal process. The tribes are the ones that actually sign off on class 7 teachers being proficient in the language and culture and being eligible to teach. that language in those communities. So that's not to say there may not be, applicable elements there. I just want everybody to have a clear understanding of that Class 7 process.
If I may, guys, I want to add just a little bit more in that. Here we are in this like language loss spiral down rapid emergency. And the speaking public then is older and older and less healthy and less healthy. And those are givens pretty much in any community. You add the COVID to it, now we're really in a situation. So in addition to that, then we're about to embark upon a new school year and not a whole bunch has changed. So the point is that if you take a look at the institutions then that have, in our case, like 98% language or 98% tribal member enrollment students there, and that's both of these schools. And you're looking at a system then, and I don't want to say that they're reluctant, it's just that change comes hard in this comfort zone called the reservation. So within these public systems then, we still, as an entity, a sovereign, not prioritized this the educational linguistics to reflect the tribe, the priority that the tribe has given to language revitalization. So in other words, our incoming teachers and our existing teachers, they don't have to use the language. They should. Policy-wise, they're supposed to, but just as Zach described, when you're building relationships with Tim, Johnny, and Mary, if you say, like in our language, "Bonjour, Ani, tawao," okay, "Hi, how you doing? Come in." And if you have a system that doesn't require that, or makes it optional, it doesn't fit with the language loss sentiment that is being proposed or that is being perpetrated in our community. So if you don't have requirements from the K through 12 system to say, okay, we're gonna make this language a real emphasis in our community and in our community institutions. In addition to that, science, the linguists, the educators that have delved into this in depth tell us what the old people always knew is that if we focus on our language, our heritage, our worldview systems, we're going to have less and less socialistic problems that typify what it is that this colonial construct, settler thinking, and settler institution type strategies happen to make in our communities. But anyway, I'll go too deep. That's my fourth cup of coffee speaking. That's what happens when you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you, Jay. Very important. Okay. So I think we could go to the next slide and introduce our next topic. It's really our first topic on the list. And it's a big one, and it encompasses quite a bit of a number of big topics that have been raised by this task force already. The nature of the pedagogy and content that candidates need to be qualified for and be able to be experienced in. And some of the points that were made are, and we've sort of built this into pedagogy and content, more robust or diverse field experience, practical work, different schools, alternative pathways, but different ways to ensure that candidates are prepared for diverse work settings through field experience and hands-on experience, as well as increased pedagogical proficiency, knowing how to teach as well as what to teach. the ability to differentiate to meet all students' needs, how to manage a classroom, different skills and competencies that we would want to see in our graduates of our programs, the ability to address trauma-informed instruction and to teach candidates, that candidates can engage in this kind of instruction and have a background in social emotional learning.
Yeah, so just to add to that, as we kind of structured this for this week's meeting, I just kind of went back through some of these topics and kind of put them under some of the different lever topics. And I will just say there's a lot of overlap. For example, when we talk about, robust and diverse field experience, we have a lever topic around, real world field experience, I believe is how it's worded. So, that would be a part of that. So it's important to keep in mind that there is overlap, but we're trying to kind of put these under the different umbrellas of the lever topics that have been. And so again, we have just a few more minutes, and I think maybe Jacqueline, the best thing to do would just be to kind of highlight these and then talk about sort of next steps for next week. But again, if we go back to the crosswalked sections around that kind of address these things that we've talked about, subchapter 3 talks about initial content, pedagogical knowledge. So again, some of the things, Jay, that you touched on in subchapter 5, early childhood education for language on differentiation, personalized learning, trauma-informed instruction. Subchapter 5 really just is the actual subject area standards, but thinking about some of these big picture things and how what they might look like in those subject area standards. And then 6 is the advanced content and clinical knowledge, partnerships and practice. Jacqueline mentioned school counseling, and subchapter 7, this would relate more to principals, supervisors, and curriculum directors. So those sort of lever topics and some of the themes that have happened in our conversation, these might be some of the places that we would look at that. Jacqueline, did you have anything to add?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
And I'm just going to check. Okay. All right. Go to the next slide. So, I did want to just, and Jacqueline and I talked about this a little bit, so lever topic 2 is around the real world experiences. Last week, there was considerable conversation about this idea of like a year-long internship and how that would impact, the preparation of our candidates, how that would make them better practitioners when they stepped into a classroom for the first time. But I think Jacqueline and I's take on it was that this group at the end of the day saw more, hurdles, challenges than opportunities with regard to that. And so kind of we settled more on the idea of, again, just those diverse experiences while they're in the EPP program. But I guess I would just, before we move on, does anybody have objection or want to clarify anything? What's sort of my summary on that?
Zach, this is Jay. I gave that a little bit of thought, and I thought that each of the suggestions that any party to this task force has offered up, they should be given some serious thought. So like in this case, we have just a very few select bachelor's degrees in this community. And whatever school that they come from, I think they can lend, I think that education as a physical, visible example in a community offers up some kind of assistance, some kind of whatever model that says, yeah, you know, I went to school, I went here, there, and I got my bachelor's. So if there was an opportunity for somebody who really wanted to do that, I would be willing to support that individual in this community, because I can slide him into either one of the schools or the college. So like I could be a make fit expert, and I don't want to dismiss that altogether, because I think it's relative, you know, especially in the tribal situation. If you really want to make an educator, that educator then has an opportunity in this setting then to go through a whole season of participating in a community, because you can't, and it doesn't work, I'm telling you guys, it doesn't work to bring somebody from the outside into a tribal community and say, here you go in August, you know, by February and March is looking for another job. Look at the Rocky Boy principal as an example. I think we're going to probably go through 3 or 4 until we actually groom one up here locally again, and that's been tried. So that's a suggestion. And I think the other suggestion is that if anybody wants to come to Rocky Boy and really participate in a study, hook up with me, and you know, I'm thinking other thoughts outside of the task force. So I want to throw that out there.
All right, Jay, I appreciate that. We've got a couple other folks here with their hands up. I think Lisa and then Gail.
Thank you. I'm not ready to set aside the idea of a year-long residency yet. When we talked last week, there were a lot of overwhelmed discussions about the barriers in terms of cost and finding people. I think that having a paid mentorship program with some skilled mentors that are trained, and I think once we know how much something might cost, we could throw $1,000 a month at a student resident for the 9 months, and I'm pretty sure we could find it in the budget. But I think it's really important to figure out how much money we need before we say we can't afford it. So my suggestion for this, just in terms of practical reality, is maybe we should design a pilot program or look at other pilot programs that are going and give it a shot in Montana and figure out what works and what doesn't work in Montana. So the short version is I'm not ready to set this aside. I don't know how the rest of the people feel, the rest of our task force members.
Just to clarify, one option, Lisa, would be to include that in our more broad recommendations that may or may not have relevance to the language. We could figure that out and we should talk about that. But I do think, and that's in the notes, that there was general consensus that sharing information about pilots that are going on already in the state would be very valuable, and that perhaps one general recommendation might be that the state should continue to explore this, and if it's effective, to look for ways to fund it. I think that was definitely clear to me from the conversation last time.
And maybe we can include it in whichever subsection that was that talks about experimental programs. We could just add a residency pilot program idea.
Okay, that's a very good recommendation to look at.
I don't want to drag this out anymore, but I have had this conversation, and it was a conversation that they approached me with. We have this really outstanding PhD who's a math teacher at our school, and he said, why don't you find somebody? And I don't know why it's me all the time, but he said, why don't you find somebody, bring them into the community, groom them up. So they're starting to use our language now. See, to come into our community and start making math curriculum then that is absolutely relative to our own community. the size of a bale, the size of a field, the volume of alfalfa, the volume of the wheat, and make math books that are specific to our own communities. Dr. Lanny Reelbird, he was a former math teacher, and that's what he recommended. So it's not an old thought. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jay. I think we have Gail and then Mary and then Susan. So we have about
Hey
6
there.
minutes. I'd like to get everybody in.
Okay, I'll make it brief. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
okay. About the year-long residency or student teaching, I'm not really thrilled about it because I have had 3 children of my own that have become teachers, and I can't imagine, I've actually talked to them all, and they're like, they couldn't even imagine doing that, putting a whole year of their life on hold so they could do this. And one of my daughters, who's also a guidance counselor, said the first couple of weeks is the same as the last couple of weeks when you're teaching. It's just all out crazy. And I think we could all agree with that. That being said, I also think that maybe where it seems like the reservations, you guys are concerned about that, and the fact that you guys aren't getting good quality teachers. So why not put some money into like a pilot at those particular schools where you do a year-long residency student teaching, but put some money behind that, or, loan forgiveness or something like that, to try to get some student teachers in there that would like to, put that whole year in there, but also get compensated for it. The reservations are a perfect place because they really do struggle, and there is some money in their reservations that they could possibly use for this, and also paying good mentors so that they can watch these kids and help them out. That's all I have to say.
All right, thank you, Gail. Why don't we have Mary go?
Okay, I saw, like, with remote support, and they couldn't afford it. And there's a lot of teachers that are working extra part-time jobs. And what remote support did for the home or for the employment was they took a few people that decided to live on their own instead of a group home, and they had remote support by giving the people that were already in supervising the group home, $2 an hour more to monitor the people in the home. So maybe like after school or something like that, you could do something like that where you were going to do a part-time job anyways to supplement your income, have them supplement the income that way. I don't know.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Susan.
I just wanted to ask, I understand that OCHI has a task force that they're looking, or a committee that they're looking at residency. I thought that came up in a previous discussion. So I agree, we do need to get more information about pilot programs. And if the state is already looking at this, could we have a bit more information about it?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And then I just wanted to say in the chat, I see some conversation about an unfunded mandate. My understanding from our last meeting with Kirk Miller was here is that procedurally, if there, any of these changes, if we were to make this recommendation or we were to put it in chapter 58, that there would have to be an economic impact analysis. And at that point, the legislature would have to appropriate funding to support this before the Board of Public Ed could vote on it. That was my understanding from the conversation. McCall, you may understand that differently. You are on the Board of Public Ed. But
Yeah, you have the beginning correct. So if this does go through, OPI would put together an economic impact statement. If that economic impact statement has a positive, amount that would go with it, then it does have to, all rules have to go in front of the Education Interim Committee. So it'll go in front of the Education Interim Committee. If the Education Interim Committee determines that it is a not insubstantial amount, that then the Board of Public Ed actually has to ask the legislature for the funding. But the board can still approve these kinds of changes to rule prior to that happening. So for example, we have these computer science standards, new computer science standards that went into effect July 1st. The board approved them. We went and asked the legislature for funding for some of the new computer science teachers, and the legislature denied it. So it still creates somewhat of an unfunded mandate, although we have 5 years to implement these. The board still has to continue to ask for that funding from the legislature, and they are in no way required or inclined to do so at this point.
Okay. Well, I see we're at time. I see Emily did have her hand up. Emily, do you want to just say something briefly?
Yeah, just really quickly, I just wanted to note one thing I said last time too, especially in terms of any type of residency pilot program, the rest, that, I think this conversation is more appropriate for those larger recommendations because standards are, again, that entry level. They are not the exemplar, they are the entry level. And I just, one other note that there's nothing that is preventing this from happening right now. And so I think that it's really important to note that we, in code, we have lots of flexibility to do lots of things. And there's nothing that prevents anyone from starting this type of pilot program right now. If you're looking for funding, then that is a question for the legislature. But just want to make sure to note that as we're wrapping up this conversation again.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Everybody who contributed to this conversation today. And, I think it's a very robust, very important conversation. And I think this group is, investing their level best in doing it thoughtfully. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to say, I think it would be good. So, we have those lever topics, 1 and 2. We have that crosswalk in the Google site. I would encourage folks to take a look at those sections under lever topics 1 and 2 and start to familiarize themselves with that. So we can kind of continue that conversation, but also maybe start transitioning a little bit to specific language. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? And are there any other thoughts from other folks? And Jacqueline, did you have anything to add before we get off here?
I would just add to be sure, since the ones you're looking at for 1 and 2 are most of the subchapters and rules, if there's one that's left out, I don't assume that it isn't relevant. So just take a look at start with the ones on the crosswalk and then be aware that the others could be relevant as well.
Right. Yeah, that's a starting point. Okay. Well, I do want to be mindful of people's time. So if there's nothing else, I'll say thank you for being here today. We look forward to continuing this conversation next week.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Have a great
And I will
week.
follow
Thank
up
you,
on some of
guys.
those items with Tristan and send out an email.